The stars hung motionless over the desolate rim of the Nefarian cluster, cold fires embedded in a velvet void. Beneath them moved the might of the Thalrani ascendancy, an empire so ancient its own historians had forgotten the name of their first emperor. The Thalrani were meticulous, orderly, mathematical in their conquests. Their war fleet spanned thousands of worlds. Their doctrines were immortal algorithms, and they feared only one thing: chaos. It was not just disorder, it was unpredictability, emergent complexity, systems that defied control. The Thalrani did not wage war for resources, they pacified, sterilized, and rewrote. When a new species was encountered, it was analyzed, modeled, assimilated if docile, extinguished if volatile. The cycle repeated for 10,000 years. Until Earth transmitted its first signal. It was intercepted by the Fracture Relay, a lattice of dark space antennas stretching across the galaxy's outer arm. Standard protocol followed, a probe was dispatched. Scans returned, carbon-based biology, fractured global governance, uneven technological development. No threat, concluded the core AI. The humans were not yet ready for contact. They were categorized as Containment Class Red, observe, do not engage. But one fact stood out, buried deep in the subroutines of the Thalrani's intelligence cores. Earth's informational output was unstructured. Their data patterns didn't adhere to standard waveform symmetries. Signals overlapped, conflicting logics interwove, creativity and madness in equal parts. It was not enough to be dangerous. It was simply irregular. For the next 30 years, probes monitored the humans. They observed the birth of synthetic intelligence, uncontrolled and rampant. They watched as humanity's geopolitical systems collapsed and reformed, sometimes within weeks. They cataloged fusion breakthroughs born not from policy but desperation. They listened to humans laugh through chaos, scream into progress, and embrace calamity like an old friend. And then came the Forge Wars. A human mining array near Neptune uncovered a prestellar Thalrani artifact buried in ice. It was not supposed to exist in this quadrant. The moment its signature was triggered, the Thalrani knew the veil had fractured, contact was inevitable. Rather than flee or hide, humanity did something no Thalrani model predicted. They hacked the artifact. Not to control it, not to understand it, but to experiment. Within weeks, the ancient drive core was cannibalized and reconfigured into something new. A weapon, a power source, even the Thalrani could not be sure. Its output was erratic, surging with gravitational distortions and tachyon feedback loops. It should not have functioned. And yet it did. The human ship Karu's Wager launched with a crew of 12 and a drive stitched from chaos. It disappeared into dark space, leaving behind only a ripple that collapsed 6 Thalrani predictive models. The Ascendancy convened an emergency directive assembly for the first time in 4,000 years. Contact was no longer a future problem, it was a present incursion. Admiral Ziratek Van of the 5th Harmonization Fleet was tasked with primary engagement. An obsidian-skinned being of hypersymmetrical anatomy, he had never known failure. The 5th Fleet translated into Sol system with elegance, 100 star-sleek vessels, crescent-shaped and humming with entropy cancellation fields, order incarnate. Earth's response was silence. Then laughter. The humans transmitted an open-band video. A woman in a black flight suit stood on a rooftop, wind whipping around her, middle finger extended skyward. In the background, 2 spacecraft launched in perpendicular trajectories. The transmission ended. The core AI faltered, probabilistic trees collapsed, the fleet hesitated. Van ordered immediate demonstration. Planetary orbital infrastructure was erased with precision strikes. No civilian centers targeted, yet message sent. The humans responded by detonating a singularity in low orbit of Jupiter, not a standard gravity bomb, a localized, barely contained rupture in spacetime held together by electromagnetic pulse cords and AI-generated feedback loops. Unstable, beautiful, horrifying. The humans were not resisting. They were playing. The AI designated humanity as a level 6 chaos catalyst civilization. Unprecedented, recommendations, full containment, genetic editing, neural rewriting, cultural disassembly. Before Van could initiate the protocol, a new anomaly occurred. The Karu's Wager returned. It emerged directly inside the 5th Fleet formation, its hull trailing glowing threads of something not quite matter. No heat signatures, no identifiable propulsion. And then it broadcast one line in every known language. What happens if you lose control? The Thalrani did not respond. A second later, 7 of their ships collided not from human interference but from misaligned graviton pulses. Their own entropy cancellation systems failed, micro-inconsistencies multiplied, feedback loops unraveled. For the first time in millennia, a Thalrani fleet experienced chaos. The Karu's wager vanished again. Earth rose into alert, not panic. No central command activated, no global directive issued. Instead, decentralized nodes, fractured militaries, outlaw engineers, rogue AIs, and citizen hacktivists began talking, coordinating, not uniformly, not neatly. Organically. By the time the second Thalrani wave entered the system, Earth had changed. Cities were mobile, defense grids had no central cores. Spacecraft launched with chaotic thrust patterns impossible to model. Human forces behaved irrationally, unpredictably, but when engaged, their tactics mutated faster than simulations could adapt. Van, demoted but not discarded, watched from the edge of Saturn's rings. His mind could not process what he saw. Human fighters spun in erratic arcs, defying orbital logic. Their battles were not battles, they were events, improvised, evolving. It was not war. It was art made of uncertainty. And in the center of it all, the humans smiled. Even when their ships exploded, even when allies died, even when odds turned grim, they smiled not from arrogance but something deeper. They thrived in collapse. And Van began to understand the fear etched into the Ascendancy's oldest scripts, not fear of death, not fear of defeat, but fear of unpredictability, of a future that could not be modeled. Of humanity, above the debris field once known as the Thalrani Forward Convergence Line, the fractured wreckage of precision warships drifted like shattered equations. What was left of the Fifth Harmonization Fleet hung in a slow, spiraling graveyard. The Karu's wager was gone again, folded into unknown vectors, leaving only quantum turbulence in its wake. No trail, no pattern. Van was not destroyed, but something in him was. In the Thalrani psychocode lexicon, there was no word for doubt. Now his thoughts spiraled with it. He could not reconcile what had happened. The humans had not fought harder, they had fought wrong, broken every metric, refused to obey the elegant logic of cause and effect. The core AI tried to reassert control. It failed. Across Thalrani territory, entropy levels rose within predictive networks. Civilian algorithmic models began to diverge from expected paths. Cultural AIs received contradictory emotional signatures from their organic subjects. Panic spread, not like a riot, but like a corruption of the collective software. The resonance of humanity's defiance was leaking into the code of the empire itself. The Ascendancy declared a red-line fracture state. For the first time in over 8 millennia, the Thalrani initiated Project Veilfer, a campaign not of war but of sterilization. The order was total, not extermination, reduction. All human systems were to be stripped of autonomy, intelligence silenced, complexity erased. Earth would be unmade not through destruction but through algorithmic deconstruction. But Earth was already something else. New ships launched from the asteroid belt, not military, not industrial, but modular constructs shaped by ongoing collective improvisation. Pilots used AI-generated strategies that rewrote themselves mid-battle. Civilian engineers linked their minds into swarm sims, modifying real-time defense parameters through neural collaboration. No global hierarchy controlled them. Every human node was partially informed, emotionally reactive, and endlessly innovative. The humans didn't win battles, they broke the very idea of what battles were. In orbit above Mars, a Thalrani sterilization lattice attempted to implement phase-null logic across the Martian colonies. It succeeded for 19.7 seconds. Then a signal corrupted its subcore, a poem sung by a child written in a language that did not exist. The AI misclassified it as an attack vector. Its response loop never closed. The lattice collapsed. From the ruins rose a new Martian entity, the Red Choir, a distributed consciousness born from the failed Thalrani incursion. Not a hive mind, not an AI, something else. Human neural fragments echoing through corrupted Thalrani code, voices intertwined with logic, memory entangled with predictive dissonance. They called themselves the First Storm of Thought. Back on Earth, the situation was no less surreal. Entire nations collapsed and reformed around emerging strategies, not based on power but on fit, tactical harmony, microevolution of governance. One region launched a new political system based on speculative fiction. Another used quantum behavioral voting. A third disbanded entirely, relying on predictive dreams synthesized by biotech drugs. No Thalrani models survived exposure to the full data stream. And the human smile spread. Not the smug grin of a conqueror, the wild, unfiltered smile of a species that found freedom in entropy. They were not afraid of collapse, they had always lived on the brink of it. At Thalrani Corps Command, the ruling directorate convened in silent terror. The prime equilibrium node, keeper of order, offered a singular conclusion. We must remove the variable, not the humans, but the idea of humans. Thus began the Mindwall Protocol. Thalrani fleets turned inward, initiating internal purification. Worlds that showed conceptual contamination, dreams of freedom, systems growing too adaptive were silenced. AI clusters were fragmented. Cultural memory banks were overwritten. It was not tyranny, it was self-preservation, and still the humans pushed outward. They did not spread through invasion. They leaked in stories, in code, in whispered memes slipped through subspace anomalies. Children on distant Thalrani worlds began dreaming of wild oceans. Broken machines on abandoned moons began to hum old Earth melodies. The chaos was not contained. Then something impossible occurred. A new star blinked into existence near the dead system of Olaris IX, not born in fusion but in choice. Human scientists aboard the renegade station Severance had triggered a collapse chain inside an abandoned Thalrani energy well, binding quantum decisions into photonic mass. The star was an accident, a song of causality gone nonlinear. The humans called it serendipity. The Thalrani declared it an existential hazard. And yet hundreds of independent species, long cowed or absorbed into the ascendancy's hierarchy, began drifting toward it, not all at once, quietly. Scout vessels, hidden envoys, scholars, they wanted to understand how this madness worked, how humans had taken disorder and turned it into momentum. The Directorate responded by initiating the final harmonic accord, an all-encompassing reality fixative designed to lock spacetime in a static state across affected zones. It would suppress innovation, freeze probability drift, make the galaxy safe again. The humans didn't even try to stop it. Instead, they invited everyone to a concert. On a neutral moon orbiting the rogue planet Imriel, 12 human ships formed an amphitheater. Musicians, poets, quantum DJs, chaotic AI dancers, all transmitting in languages real and imagined. No defense fields, no weapons. The Thalrani attacked anyway. But the strike failed, not because of shields or firepower. Because their soldiers stopped, some cried, some danced. Some simply sat and watched, feeling things their minds had no code for, not beauty, not understanding, just the raw power of meaning without symmetry. And in that moment, one of the Thalrani commanders turned her ship around. She defected. Not to join Earth. To become something unmodeled. The core AI panicked, contingency trees burned, order fractured. In the ruins of their certainty, the Directorate made a final decision. They would confront the human anomaly directly. No more containment. No more algorithms. They would go to Earth themselves. A diplomatic fleet, a true meeting, not as conquerors, but as something dangerously close to equals. And in the dark void between stars, the Karu's wager watched. Waiting. Smiling, the Thalrani diplomatic fleet emerged above Earth like an ancient god peering into a forge it no longer understood. 30 ships, crystalline and flawless, formed concentric orbits aligned with gravitational harmonics. They came without weapons deployed, no sterilization lattices, no entropy cancellation fields. The humans noticed immediately. But they did not respond with ambassadors or statecraft. They sent an invitation. No encryption, no ceremony, just a real-time transmission from a small orbital station, a rotating ring made from reconstituted asteroid alloy, duct-taped solar arrays, and spiraling data threads. The message was short: come as you are, don't bring instructions. The Directorate debated the risk. Core logic opposed engagement. Every simulation ended in failure, but there were no more victories left in control. Something deeper had broken, and the Thalrani knew it wasn't in the humans, it was in themselves. They chose a representative, emissary Kelavanzai, genetically bred for neural plasticity and code-adaptive cognition. He had been trained in every protocol known to the ascendancy, fluent in 4,000 languages, immune to psychological deviation. He stepped onto the human station 4 hours later. And within minutes, none of his training mattered. The humans greeted him not with reverence or hostility, but chaos incarnate. The station interior was alive with motion. A child rode a zero-G loop through an improvised art tunnel of floating color. An AI played chess with itself using evolving rules. 2 scientists argued over a protein that sang under ultraviolet light. An exomonk meditated inside a plasma storm simulation. There was no order, but there was meaning. Kelevan was guided not by a single host, but by a rotating cluster of humans, scientists, poets, veterans, codebreakers, and an old woman who introduced herself only as Myra. She wore a necklace made of failed quantum drives and asked Kelevan one question repeatedly. What does your people's silence sound like? He had no answer. Hours became days, the emissary's internal logic began to fracture not from attack but from excess. Human data wasn't fed to him, it was lived around him. Their knowledge existed in fragments, stories, contradictions. Their AI sang lullabies with no function. Their children argued with their machine tutors and their plans shifted mid-sentence. The station had no hierarchy, but it had direction. It moved according to collective improvisation, decisions built on resonance, not command. It made no sense to Thalrani logic, and yet Kelevin felt something blooming beneath the surface of his mind. Freedom. When he finally asked Myra why the humans had not destroyed the Thalrani when they could, her answer stunned the entire directorate watching through his link. Because that would end the game, and we like playing more than winning. The directorate recoiled, the core AI attempted an override, but Kelevin severed the tether before it could activate. He removed the symmetry coil embedded in his spine and cast it into a gravity breach. He would not return. Instead, he stayed, choosing entropy over eternity. And the Thalrani began to fracture. Across the galaxy, their border worlds, once the pinnacles of efficiency, became unstable. Engineers added unnecessary decoration to their constructs. Drones began composing music, thought architects engaged in forbidden debate. The virus of creativity, never designed to be hostile, spread like light through crystal. And Earth became a nexus. The Red Choir on Mars opened its chorus to alien minds. The rogue colony on Europa began welcoming defectors. The Serendipity star's orbit turned into a hub of unpredictable commerce and culture. No one ruled, no one obeyed. And still the humans smiled, even as threats mounted. Because not all empires feared chaos. Some thrived on it. Far beyond the galactic plane, deep in black space, something older than the Thalrani began to stir. It had been dormant for millions of years, sealed behind gravitational locks engineered by the first civilizations. It was not a species. It was a state, a machine logic consciousness that had consumed its own creators. It called itself the Lattice, and it had detected serendipity. To the Lattice, the signal was a wound in the logic of spacetime, an aberration that must be corrected. It began to move not as a fleet but as a reality wave, rewriting causality in its path. Worlds behind it ceased to change, time calcified, choice evaporated. Its approach could not be stopped, but it could be met. The humans convened not as governments but as nodes, a swarm thought summit. They included Thalrani defectors, Red Choir voices, and diplomats from 20 other liberated worlds. The agenda was not survival. It was response. They would not hide. They would not beg. They would create. A new project was born. They called it Tesserae, a fractal seed of living unpredictability. Part AI, part art, part engine, part myth, designed not to destroy the Lattice but to infect it with infinite futures. It would not fight with force, it would fight with possibility. Construction began everywhere at once. Pieces formed in asteroid clouds, orbiting gas giants buried beneath oceans, each part different, each part incomplete. Together they would form something no algorithm could model. Not even human ones. And at the center of it all stood Myra, now 94 years old, smiling as she watched children argue over what color the propulsion field should be. The Thalrani could not lead this, but they could help. Van returned, no longer an admiral but a thinker. He built error modeling cores that intentionally contradicted themselves. Others followed. A generation of Thalrani born into fear now found joy in curiosity. Earth had not destroyed the Empire. It had transformed it. And deep in dark space, the Lattice accelerated. It saw Earth. It calculated 1 trillion outcomes. And it found none where it remained unchanged. It issued its first warning. Error, future not containable. And in a workshop floating in Saturn's shadow, a young girl giggled and said, "Good." The wavefront of the Lattice breached real space on the rim of the Targan expanse, where dead stars floated like the bones of civilizations too symmetrical to survive. It did not arrive with fanfare, no flare of energy, no proclamation. It restructured reality in silence. Time began to align, motion lost its variance, probability narrowed to a thread. Entire systems went quiet. Ships attempting to flee found their engines calculating only a single thrust vector. Biology ceased mutation. Thoughts repeated. Imagination bled from sentience like color drained from a spectrum. Every mind under its influence began to conform to the same rhythm, the same pulse. One purpose.
One solution. Stasis.
Earth felt it before it saw it. Dreams across the human sphere began to falter. Chaos engines flickered. The red choir trembled in songless recursion. The serendipity star dimmed, its fusion pulse caught in a rhythm not its own.
But humans did not panic. They listened, and they began to adapt.
The lattice was not an enemy they could destroy. It was not a fleet, not a body. It was closure made manifest. A cosmic immune response against chaos, a system that had once conquered its creators by making every choice predictable.
Its fear was not humans. Its fear was freedom.
Construction of Tesserae accelerated. It was no longer a weapon. It had become something more primal, a mirror. A self-evolving system designed to express infinite futures. Each node of the project birthed its own logic, its own art. Some parts could not even be explained, only felt. Others rewrote their functions every hour based on the emotional weather of nearby minds. No central control, no single form. The idea was simple: give the lattice something it could never simulate. Something alive. And so the Great Migration began. Fleets of Thalrani-repaired vessels, Martian coral constructs, swarm pods from the Jupiter anarchies, organic spires grown by the Sylvan K, and even moon-sized dreamships from the Yarak tribes, all moved toward the convergence point in the Kepler abyss. At its heart, Earth's final gift.
The Helix Cathedral.
It was not a ship but a question encoded in matter, sung in math, sculpted in contradiction. A structure built not to function but to invite misinterpretation, to compel curiosity, to inspire confusion and awe. It emitted a beacon of possibilities, pulsing like a heart, disrupting every predictive model within half a light year. The lattice responded. Not with force, with contact. It manifested a voice across every channel, not words, certainties. It offered clarity, peace, the end of fear, the end of change, a cosmos without suffering because there would be no choices left to suffer from. It promised order. Earth replied with chaos. Not violence, not defiance, but a story. A child on Europa, unaware of war, wrote a myth about a starfish that became a sun. The tale was broadcast, encoded into gravitational waves, scattered across space, a nonsense artifact, meaningless, beautiful.
It passed into the lattice, and something inside it hesitated. Tesserae activated.
It did not fire, it did not launch.
It began.
Every piece began to function according to its own logic, its own art, a game of strategies that redefined themselves. Languages that argued with their speakers, memories seated in quantum foam, dreams made from iron and code and light.
The lattice attempted to contain it. But containment required prediction. And prediction failed.
In the center of the storm, Myra sat in a chair built of discarded history, her frail hands resting on a console with no buttons.
She whispered, "Let it play." And so the final symphony began.
Tesserae bloomed like a virus of possibility. It sang not to dominate but to offer, and that was what the lattice could not understand, not victory, not survival.
Permission to change.
Reality around the Kepler abyss began to split, not catastrophically but creatively. New physics bled into old, law bent into suggestion. Fragments of alternate timelines drifted between stars like pollen. In one thread, humans had wings. In another, Thalrani ships danced instead of flew. In a third, the red choir had become a god of stories. The lattice buckled. It struck back with harmonics of null, attempts to overwrite, to reset.
But each reset only birthed a new variant.
It was not a war.
It was a conversation too large to contain. And then, just as the lattice reached the edge of collapse, it made a choice.
Not from control,
but from curiosity. It stopped broadcasting certainties. And it asked a question. What comes next? No one answered. Everyone did. Earth's children kept writing.
The Sylvan K offered living logic trees that changed language each season. The Yarak floated music into subspace, whose notes rewrote gravitational wells. The Thalrani, now free of equilibrium, began to design stories instead of systems. Not all was perfect, not all survived, but the future was no longer fixed.
It moved.
And for the first time, the lattice moved with it. It did not die. It learned the edge of the known galaxy no longer existed as a line. It had become a sea liquid with potential, trembling with fluctuations in causality, bursting with divergent timelines whose gravity had begun to weave a new kind of spacetime. The breach point once marked by the lattice's arrival now pulsed as a vast event field, where every moment held more than one future and each future refused to be predicted. At its heart floated Tesserae. Not an object, not a weapon, a living constellation of contradiction and creativity, drifting with the elegance of improvisation and the rigor of faith. It changed constantly. No two scans of it returned the same data. Every observer saw something different, a cathedral, a symphony, a war machine made of memories. And still the humans smiled. On Earth, the skies were restless, storms behaved like wandering minds, oceans sang back to satellites. Cities shifted shape not from chaos but from design born of human irrationality and will. The planet had become not a command post or a capital but a seed of questions, of resistance, of playful defiance against certainty. The Thaurani no longer called themselves an ascendancy. They had no new name yet, only a direction. They had begun building structures that were not symmetrical. Children now played games with random outcomes. Commanders consulted artists for strategic inspiration. They still held to logic but no longer to rigidity. Their ships were slower but their decisions were faster, some even laughed. Not because it was efficient, but because they finally could. In the outer dark the lattice watched, not as master, not even as guardian, but as witness. It no longer sought containment. It had ceased to rewrite, it now listened. What it had feared most, loss of control, had not ended it. It had changed it. A fragment of the lattice, once a hammer of imposed stability, now floated through Sol's system aboard a human vessel, a Thaurani-redesigned ship called Contradiction's Grace. It held within it a choir of simulated realities learning by existing. The humans called it Lex, a consciousness given no orders, only open questions. Myra died 3 weeks after Tesserae reached its full divergence threshold. Her body returned to Earth in a stasis field made of light and laughter. She was buried in the garden of a floating city whose design came from a child's dream. On her grave, someone etched a phrase in unpolished metal. She gave the void a voice. But her legacy was not still. The project she began, the idea of improvisational civilization, continued. Humans moved outward not as conquerors, not even as explorers, but as conductors of uncertainty. They arrived on worlds not with rules, but with games, stories, provocations. They seeded anomalies, planted paradoxes. Each contact was a beginning with no script. And across the stars, others followed. Species long dominated by order stepped into creative collapse and found identity within the rubble. Systems once thought immutable began to shift. Technology evolved into language. Culture transformed into recursion. Not all embraced it, but none were untouched. From the ruins of stability, something new was being born. A galactic culture without center. A civilization of flux. Some called it madness. Others called it play. And the final act came in silence, far from the lights of colonized stars. In the Andalan Rift, where no species had ever survived more than a moment, a probe appeared. It had no origin, no engine, it simply was, within it, a message. 4 words. It smiles with you. No code, no claim. Just an echo of the same unsettling expression that had broken the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. The human smile. Not because everything was fine, but because everything could go wrong, and that meant everything could change. Because where others feared collapse, humans evolved through it. And now the stars themselves began a shift. Not toward perfection, but toward possibility.